nationalist militants have terrorized Cabo Delgado province in the southeastern African nation of Mozambique, killing and displacing thousands of people. Last month, the U.S. government designated them as ISIS affiliates and sent special forces to help train Mozambique's Marines. And just last week, they attacked a town called Palma, which hosts international oil and gas companies, killing dozens. ISIS claimed responsibility. Before that, special correspondent Neha Wadaker and her team were among the first to reach the region and speak to survivors. They have this report.
I saw this happening, killing. The men told us, sit there and watch someone be beheaded.
This is 10-year-old Maria Antuman. Both of her parents were killed in the attack she witnessed. She managed to escape into the forest. As she fled, her foot got caught in a hunting snare. She lay trapped and terrified for hours.
I was trapped from 6 o'clock a.m. until 5 o'clock p.m. I was screaming and crying, and people came to open the trap. And when they opened it, they removed it and saw the wound.
Maria was rescued and taken south to a hospital in Pemba, the capital city in Cabo Delgado province that is like a last frontier between safety and the fighting in the north. There, she recovered from her wounds and malaria. Her aunt also escaped that day and says the attackers are known locally as Al-Shabaab, an Arabic phrase which means the youth. What started as a local insurgency of disenfranchised young people has evolved into what the U.S. government now says is the Islamic State.
Al-Shabaab came in at 3 p.m., and at 11 p.m. they started burning houses down there in Bilibiza. I saw them kill people with knives. One of them used a chainsaw on someone's neck.
It took days for Maria's aunt to reach safety in Matouj, where improvised centers have been rapidly set up for those fleeing attacks. At the time of our visit, more than 10,000 people occupied the centers, although they had enough water and sanitation facilities to serve only a few hundred. And as the violence has escalated recently, the number of people in need of this safe haven has exploded. Conditions here are declining. There's little access to food, shelter, or medical care.
Life is hard here. When food comes, some get it, some don't.
UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, says in addition to the violence, one of its greatest concerns is the transmission of waterborne diseases, especially cholera, which is rapidly spreading through the area. Matouj seems to be the epicenter, accounting for more than half of all new cases. Isabel Pereira, a nutrition specialist at UNICEF, says that despite their best efforts, the capacity of humanitarian organizations to care for internally displaced people, or IDPs, is stretched to the limit.
One of the biggest challenges is that, with especially the districts that they have high number of IDPs, we are overwhelmed. The health facilities, they are totally overwhelmed. There's no capacity for them to respond as they should.
During one of our visits, we followed a group of displaced families being moved to a new resettlement location.
These are among the first 57 families who have moved to this location from a temporary accommodation center approximately 50 kilometers away. This area has been assigned by the government of Mozambique to host families fleeing attacks by armed groups in the north of the country. Behind me, you can see the families unloading the few belongings they still have left. Over the next few months, they will rebuild their lives here as they wait to see when and if they can return home.
Here, we met 33-year-old Balamadi Abadre, who fled into the forest with his elderly parents, his wife, and his young children after armed groups attacked his village. When we met Abadre, he had already been living in Matouj for 7 months.
The authorities registered us. They said, "We are taking you to another place, but we will build you the house and you will stay in these new houses."
The building materials arrived. Abadre and the other men labored in the sweltering heat, dragging the poles and thatch that would become their new homes. Abadre has been told that this arrangement is only temporary, but the creation of these semi-permanent settlements indicates that his family's stay may last months, if not years.
I don't want to be here, but the government said, Come stay here and wait until the war is over. And when the war ends, you can go back home. And what I want to say is that I'm crying out to go back home.
Some escaping violence in the north have fled by boat rather than on foot. They sail from the mainland coastal towns to a string of small islands along Mozambique's coastline. Ibo Island was once a sparkling ecotourism destination, but in 2019, Cyclone Kenneth ripped through the region, reducing Ibo's hotels and colonial-era buildings to rubble. Just a year later, armed groups tried to seize control of the islands. From one of Ibo's forts, Issa Tarmamad, the island's district administrator, like most Mozambicans, says he is angry and bewildered by the needless suffering.
It doesn't make sense. They don't have religion, these insurgents or terrorists. The religions forbid you from killing people, and they kill. The religions forbid you from decapitating, and they decapitate. They don't follow any prophet, because no prophet has this attitude that they have.
After reaching the islands, many displaced families travel onwards by boat until they reach the safety and security of the capital city, Pemba. When they land on the beaches, aid workers and locals try to offer help. 55-year-old Wanaicha Mamadi has lived her whole life on this beach. She is hosting 47 family members in a one-bedroom shack, many children sent alone by their parents as violence escalates across the region.
When I get something like a bag of rice, I only make it in the morning. I don't make lunch because if I make lunch, the kids eat late, and at night they don't sleep.
For 10-year-old Maria, who fled the attack on her village after her parents were killed, this conflict has forever changed her life. While recovering at the hospital in Pemba, she had no hope of ever seeing anyone in her family again. Unbeknownst to her, her aunt, Anna Maria Bichet, had fled the village and was staying at the displacement center when someone told her that her niece, Maria, may have survived the attack. Bichet saved up enough money to travel to the hospital. Miraculously, the two were reunited. Today, they live together in Matouche. With both Maria's parents dead, Bichet is the only family Maria has left who can care for her.
Some days I remember my mother, father, and all the people. All of them I remember.
The trauma Maria has endured is now being inflicted on tens of thousands of more people who are displaced after last week's attack in Palma. The bloody attack means two things: that the battle for control of resource-rich northern Mozambique is heating up, and that too many more children will end up like Maria, orphaned and traumatized. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Neha Wadaker in Pemba, Mozambique.
African countries jumping at China for the so-called Chinese financial traps. Even in China's social media, there are some noises challenging China for its investments in Africa, Latin America, and so on. Spending so much money on Africa has been a hot topic for Chinese netizens, who think that China is still a developing country, and it has just The most important reason why China invests so much money abroad, however, is that China has a foreign exchange reserve of over $3 trillion, an equivalent of around 20 trillion RMB. China cannot use that money in its own territory, as the US dollar is not a legal currency for circulation in its mainland territory. Moreover, to maintain such a reserve, China has to inject the same value of RMB into its economy, causing severe inflation. Its sky-high housing index and CPI, Consumer Price Index, are direct results of the excessive, unusable foreign exchange. Having enough foreign exchange reserve can help China weather the financial turmoils, but the excessive reserve also has its adverse effect. By spending its superfluous US dollars on overseas markets, like Africa and Latin America, China can ease the pressure of its overheated housing market and the soaring consumer price index. It is a win-win strategy for both Africa and China. The same is true with other countries, where China has invested heavily. As a result, China's commitment to strengthen China-Africa solidarity and cooperation will not stop, because China also needs Africa to absorb its unusable dollars. The United States is not happy with China spending the dollars, however. It thinks China is violating the rules established by the Americans after World War II. The US has generated, and is generating, tons of US dollars with digital zeros and ones. It has bought extremely cheap products from China to enable American families to live happy lives at the cost of almost nothing. It has been relentlessly transferring its inflation to China and has filled China's treasury warehouses, both physical and virtual, with printed or digital dollars of negative value. Recently, a Republican congressman called Brian Mast wants the United States to permanently withhold payments from the US and other countries on debt owed to China. He thinks China has left untold economic destruction in the US during the pandemic, according to Fox News reported several days ago. We strongly recommend that guy check his brain before initiating such a stupid move, as it will undermine US Treasury bonds' credibility and harm the dollar supremacy, without which the United States will collapse overnight. President Joe Biden just issued another $1.9 trillion to boost the US economy. And who will foot the bill for the generous helicopter money? The answer is undeniable: the whole world except the United States. Provided that the US government told the world that its treasury bonds are useless electronic void checks, and the buyers are not entitled to payments, for whatever reason the US can find, more and more countries will abandon the US dollar like Iran. As for the so-called claim of untold economic destruction, it is more like a fallacy than just a lie. Till today, the United States has been rejecting the World Health Organization to check the root cause of its unknown flu that appeared and killed thousands of people in 2019. And no one has explained why the vaping-related white lung disease suddenly disappeared after the spread of COVID-19 in the States. Millions of people in other countries, if not in billions, have been using electronic cigarettes. Only Americans suffered from white lung diseases in 2019. Were those Americans so fragile, as if made in the so-called cheap toy factories in China? We are too young and too naive, so we do not know whether Spain ever paid reparations for the Spanish flu, which had been first found in the United States over 100 years ago. As for the pandemic, the former US president blocked visitors and airlines from China as early as the beginning of February 2020, when the US only had one-digit confirmed cases. It is so funny to blame China for the untold economic destruction in the United States. When the Western media attacked China for lack of transparency, the New York State governor intentionally hid the number of COVID victims in New York's care homes. We do not know whether this Republican congressman is trying to accumulate enough lies to pave his way to the presidency, like Donald Trump. If so, congrats to him for being on the right course. In terms of setting other countries up with financial traps, Wall Street's geniuses are superb and unbeatable. They have designed various schemes to destroy the economies in Latin America, Asia, Europe, and Africa, and then use the World Bank as a benefactor to grab those countries' natural resources and critical sectors as the price of freeing them out of traps. Their most significant victory was on the Christmas of 1991 against the former Soviet Union. The Wall Street experts first privatized Soviet national assets. They then used credit rating agencies like Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch to downgrade the sovereign and enterprise ratings. And at last, they took over those invaluable assets with pennies, which they bestowed to those ignorant Soviet people, just like they awarded the former Soviet Union president with the Nobel Peace Prize as an incentive for him to dismember the fearsome Soviet Union. Now in Africa, China wants to set up Chinese standards by funding big projects and developing local economies with its useless US dollars. How can the Western capitalists tolerate this? As the second largest land and the second populous continent, Africa will be one of the major arenas in coming decades for China and Western powers. If the Chinese control it, how can the Western magicians play the same schemes as before? In recent years, the Chinese government has helped Africa in various ways, particularly with government aids and corporate investments. China is investing heavily in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and it also starts investing in Europe, the United States' backyard. Very soon, Western countries will find that Chinese companies fill up most niches. It should be the main reason why the United States thinks China is the most significant competitor and enemy ever in US history. Still, the worst part of the problem is that the Chinese are the best students and understand the Wall Street schemes. China even initiated an Asian Development Bank to serve the World Bank's purpose in developing countries. In previous years before the pandemic, China encouraged its citizens to spend as much US dollar as they can outside China. Many people know that China is the #1 exporter to over 160 countries. Few people know Chinese tourists are the #1 product that China exported to the world before the pandemic. Every Chinese tourist is like a name card, introducing China to the world, amplifying its influence worldwide, although not every name card is neat and pleasant. In 2020, most Chinese stayed at home. A lot of countries suffered when no Chinese visitors came to buy their luxury goods. Chinese visitors are exerting a more considerable influence on various countries.
Recently written about the connection between capitalism in the United States as a system and the practices of violence, both domestically and abroad, which we have seen more and more of. Tell us a little bit about how you see that connection.
Okay, I'd like to break that into two parts if it's okay.
Fine.
A lot of people understand militarism to be about contests between nations, and militarism is generally framed in geopolitical terms, and the business aspects to militarism are left out of the conversation. However, my contention would be that they are a fundamental motivator of the business of war. And I would put these into the categories of military production, when bombs are created and dropped, profits are earned. I would put it into the context of wars for resources. The United States was recently involved in trying to overthrow the government of Bolivia in order to, Bolivia is a major source of lithium for electric vehicle car batteries. And so that's one resource motivation. And then I would throw the U.S. war against Iraq from 2003 in there as well, and suggests that militarism is motivated by the desire to control natural resources. And then third, and something that people don't think that much about, is that for capitalism to function, it requires a legal infrastructure. And as globalism has taken off in recent years, the legal infrastructure has been built out domestically and overseas through trade agreements, but they require a credible threat of violence in order to assure that profits can be repatriated. So in the realms of the business of building war material and resource control and in globalization, my argument is that militarism is intimately tied to the capitalist profit motive and to capitalism.
Yeah, you know, there was a recent story, maybe you saw it from the BBC, noting that the United States has increased its role in global arms sales to being 37%, by far the largest country in the world distributing lethal weapons around the world, and that fully 1/4 of the entire arms sales and the many, many billions of dollars go to one country, Saudi Arabia. And it occurred to a lot of people, including the BBC, that letting the leaders of Saudi Arabia off the hook around the Khashoggi murder is not unconnected to, as you put it, the business dimension of these arms sales. Okay, let me turn next to a question. Do you find that the capitalism of the United States is significantly different from the capitalism in other countries, or would you not think that? What's your view?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because associated with neoliberalism over the last 40 or so years of capitalist development has been globalization. And so there have been, depending on how you want to count them, 2 or 3 bouts of globalization in capitalist history. And the most recent would be the neoliberal epoch here. And so depending on how you consider capitalism, there are individual countries, and I'll speak to that in just a minute, who have capitalist economies. The globalization is the effort to build out the capitalist infrastructure internationally. And this shifts the focus from countries specifically to a kind of global capitalism. And I would like to speak to what's framed as competition between the United States and China. I do not care for the terminology, and I think that it's misleading and militaristic. But it serves to frame the difference that you're speaking about, the country-specific difference. The Chinese government has responsibility for the largest population in the world. And they've spent the last 4 decades developing economically with a focus on raising the living standards of the Chinese people. And I would like to contrast this with the last 4 decades in the United States, where the industrial core has been hollowed out. And the focus has been on concentrating income as highly as it can be concentrated by immiserating workers, by cutting industrial jobs, and in the process destroying lives through deaths of despair and entire communities.
Yeah, it's a remarkable difference. It's a remarkable difference.